My mother-in-law grinned at the 30 guests gathered in the massive dining room. "This is my daughter-in-law," she announced, her voice echoing over the clinking crystal. "But she is leaving. My son is filing for divorce." I walked in carrying a roasted turkey, completely calm. My husband stood up, trying to look powerful next to his 24-year-old mistress. I just smiled, pulled a stack of papers from my pocket and dropped them on the table. "You are right, Cynthia," I said. "We are divorcing. But I filed first." "Oh, and Bradley, did you tell your mother you mortgaged her retirement fund to buy your mistress a Porsche?" "My name is Olivia, and I am 33 years old. If you have ever had a toxic mother-in-law try to humiliate you in front of a crowd, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how I absolutely destroyed my cheating husband and his snobby family without raising my voice once. Let me paint the picture for you. It was Thanksgiving evening. We were hosting dinner at a sprawling modern mansion in the affluent suburbs. I say we, but for the past 7 years of my marriage to Bradley, his mother Cynthia treated the house like her personal country club. Cynthia is 60 years old, dripping in designer labels she buys using a family trust fund she constantly brags about. She loves to remind everyone that her son is a highly successful commercial real estate broker. And me. According to Cynthia, I was just the frumpy wife who worked from home. I spent my days in comfortable clothes typing away on my laptop. Bradley and Cynthia loved telling their high society friends that I was a low-level data entry clerk. I never corrected them. I just let them believe they were the financial pillars of the family. I let Bradley buy expensive suits and pretend he was a titan of industry. I kept my mouth shut when Cynthia paraded around complaining about my lack of ambition. That night, 30 of Cynthia's closest, wealthiest friends were seated around the massive mahogany dining table. I had been in the kitchen for hours preparing a feast. When I pushed open the swinging doors carrying a 20-pound roasted turkey on a heavy silver platter, the room suddenly fell dead silent. Cynthia was standing at the head of the table. She tapped her spoon against her champagne flute. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" She projected her voice, ensuring every single guest was watching her. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me as I stood there holding the hot food. "I want you all to take a good look at my daughter-in-law, Olivia. She has been serving us well today, which is fitting, because that is about all she is good for. But take a good look, because this is the last time she will be hosting our family holidays." I stood completely still, the heat from the turkey warming my face. Beside Cynthia stood my husband, Bradley, 35 years old, and wearing a custom suit he could not actually afford. Standing entirely too close to him was Lexi, his 24-year-old assistant. Lexi was wearing a skin-tight red dress and a smug little smirk, casually sipping from a crystal glass, as if she already owned the place. Cynthia smiled brightly at the stunned crowd. "My son has finally come to his senses. He is filing for divorce from this lazy freeloader. He is moving on to someone who actually understands his ambitious lifestyle. Someone with class and potential." She gestured grandly to Lexi, who practically beamed with pride. Gasps rippled through the dining room. Several of the wealthy guests whispered behind their hands, staring at me with a mix of pity and absolute disgust. I looked down the table at Monica, my 30-year-old sister-in-law, who looked genuinely horrified by her mother's cruelty. Sitting next to her was her husband, Terrence. Terrence is 34, a brilliant African-American forensic accountant, and frankly, the only person in this husband's family with an ounce of actual integrity. Terrence caught my eye and gave me a barely noticeable nod. He knew exactly what was about to happen. Bradley puffed out his chest, trying to play the role of the wealthy, ruthless patriarch taking control of his life. He looked at me with pure disdain. "Put the turkey down, Olivia. Take off that cheap apron and pack your bags. You are embarrassing yourself by standing there." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone waited for me to cry, to scream, to drop the food and run out of the room in tears. That is what a victim would do. That is what a helpless data entry clerk dependent on her rich husband would do. But I was not a victim. I walked calmly to the center of the table and set the heavy silver platter down with a solid thud. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel, reached behind my neck, and untied the apron. Cynthia sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Yes, take off that cheap apron, you pathetic little clerk. You do not belong in this world, and you never did. I let the apron fall to the floor. Underneath, I was not wearing some cheap house outfit. I was wearing a tailored navy blue silk blouse and slacks that cost more than Bradley's entire wardrobe. I reached into the deep pocket of the discarded apron, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and slapped them onto the table right next to the gravy boat. You are absolutely right, Cynthia, I said, my voice ringing out clearly across the completely silent room. Bradley and I are getting a divorce. But he is not filing. I filed 3 days ago. Bradley's smug expression faltered instantly. Lexi stopped smiling, her grip tightening on her wine glass. I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on the edge of the table, locking eyes with my mother-in-law. Oh, and Cynthia, since we are airing out all the dirty family secrets tonight in front of your lovely friends, I have a quick question for you. Did your highly successful son happen to mention that he secretly mortgaged your sacred retirement fund last month? The color drained completely from Cynthia's face. She looked at Bradley, who suddenly looked like he was going to be sick. I turned my gaze to Lexi, giving her a sweet, razor-sharp smile. He needed the cash. I explained loudly to the room. He needed the cash to buy Lexi that shiny new Porsche parked in the driveway outside. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. The silence in the dining room shattered into a million pieces. Bradley's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He lunged forward, snatching the thick stack of legal documents right off the table. He tore through the pages, his eyes darting frantically across the text, searching for a lie he would never find. He crumpled the top page in his fist and slammed his hands on the mahogany wood. "How dare you!" he roared, the veins in his neck bulging. "You manipulative, lying fraud! You think you can walk into my family's house, ruin our Thanksgiving dinner, and make up these insane stories." Lexi tightened her grip on Bradley's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. She glared at me, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You heard him?" She snapped, her voice shrill and grating. "You are just a jealous, bitter woman who cannot handle that he upgraded. Get your cheap clothes and get out of his house." The wealthy guests surrounding the table immediately began to whisper their voices, creating a toxic chorus of judgment. I could hear the sneers from Cynthia's country club friends. "So ungrateful," one woman muttered behind her wineglass. "Bradley gave her a beautiful life, and this is how the data entry clerk repays him." Another older man scoffed. They looked at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into a palace and soiled the Persian rugs. Cynthia, recovering from her initial shock, stood tall, attempting to regain her regal posture. She pointed toward the heavy oak front doors. "You are a delusional, vindictive little girl." Cynthia spat, her voice trembling with manufactured rage. "My son provides everything for you. He put this roof over your head. Now get out of my son's house before I have you physically thrown onto the street." I did not flinch. I did not cry. Instead, I threw my head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings and made the crystal chandeliers seem to rattle. The sheer absurdity of their arrogance was intoxicating. Bradley stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "What is so funny?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You have lost your mind." I stopped laughing and reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small black electronic remote control. I held it up for everyone to see, then pressed the main button. A loud, heavy mechanical clank echoed from outside as the massive iron security gates at the end of the driveway locked shut. "Your house, Bradley?" I asked, my tone deadly calm and dripping with condescension. "Your family's house. Tell me, in the 7 years we have been married, did you ever once bother to read the closing documents for this property? Or were you too busy admiring your reflection in the mirror and pretending to be a commercial real estate titan?" Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at the remote in my hand. "Let me educate you, since your reading comprehension seems lacking," I said, taking a slow step toward him. This $2 million estate is owned by Horizon LLC. Horizon LLC is a corporate entity that was established 3 years before I ever made the mistake of marrying you, and I am the sole owner, founder, and CEO of Horizon LLC. The whispers among the guests abruptly stopped. The silence was deafening. You do not own a single brick of this mansion, Bradley. I continued, my voice sharp as a razor. You have never owned it. You have been a freeloading tenant living completely rent-free under my roof while posing as a wealthy provider to impress your shallow friends and your gullible little assistant. That is impossible, Bradley stammered, taking a step back. The color was rapidly draining from his face. I pay the utility bills. I pay for the landscaping. You pay the light bill, Bradley, I corrected him, stepping right into his personal space. I pay the massive mortgage. I pay the property taxes. I pay the premium insurance. And I pay for all of it using the salary from the company you mocked for 7 years. I let you play the big, strong breadwinner because your fragile male ego demanded it. But this is my property. I turned my gaze to Lexi, whose smug smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. She looked from me to Bradley, suddenly realizing the wealthy catch she thought she had snared was actually a broke cheating fraud drowning in debt. And as for you, Cynthia, I said, pivoting to my mother-in-law, you have spent years treating my home like your personal resort. You drank my expensive wine, you paraded your friends through my hallways, and you called me a freeloader. The truth is, you are the parasites. I looked around at the stunned faces of the 30 guests. You all have exactly 15 minutes to pack up your coats and vacate my property. After that, anyone still standing inside these walls will be charged with criminal trespassing. Cynthia gasped, clutching her diamond necklace. You cannot do this. You are bluffing. I will call the police right now and have you arrested for this harassment. I smiled, a slow, cold curve of my lips. I already did. Right on cue, the shrill, piercing wail of police sirens pierced the cold November night air. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the large dining room windows, painting Bradley's horrified face in alternating colors. I had timed the call perfectly, reporting a hostile domestic disturbance and unwanted trespassers at my exact address. The sound of the sirens grew louder as the cruisers pulled up to my locked iron gates. Cynthia's eyes rolled back in her head. She let out a dramatic, high-pitched shriek, clutched her chest with both hands, and collapsed onto the expensive dining room rug in a perfectly executed, entirely fake swoon. The heavy oak doors swung open, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the grand foyer. Cynthia miraculously recovered from her fainting spell the exact second she realized nobody was rushing to her aid. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive silk dress wrinkling as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "Arrest her right now!" Cynthia shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "She is threatening us in our own home. She is completely unhinged." The lead officer ignored her theatrics entirely and walked directly toward me. "Ma'am, we received a call about a hostile domestic disturbance and unwanted trespassers at this location. Is everything all right here?" I calmly walked over to the antique console table, picked up a pristine manila folder, and handed it to the officer. "I am perfectly fine, officer. I am the sole property owner. Here is the certified deed, the LLC registration matching my identification and my state-issued driver license. The man screaming in the dining room is my soon-to-be ex-husband, and the woman in the red dress is his mistress. I want them and all of these guests removed from my property immediately." Bradley puffed out his chest aggressively, stepping into the officer's personal space, attempting to use his commercial real estate broker voice to assert dominance. "Officer, be reasonable. This is marital property. She cannot just kick me out on Thanksgiving. You cannot legally force a man out of his own house because of a simple marital dispute." The officer scrutinized the documents, carefully checking the watermarks, then looked up at Bradley with complete indifference. "Sir, your name is nowhere on this deed. The legal homeowner has formally revoked her permission for you to be on the premises. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your immediate personal belongings and leave the property, or you will be placed in handcuffs and arrested for trespassing." Lexi let out a high-pitched gasp. The reality of the situation finally hit her. She grabbed her designer purse, her high heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor as she sprinted for the front door, entirely abandoning Bradley without a second glance. Cynthia shrieked again, her face a mask of absolute horror, as her wealthy country club friends practically trampled each other to escape the humiliating scene. They rushed out to their luxury cars, whispering frantically to one another, destroying Cynthia's carefully crafted social standing with every single step. Bradley glared at me, his fists shaking with violent rage. "You are going to pay for this, Olivia. I will take everything you have." The officers escorted him out by the elbow, practically dragging Cynthia behind him as she wailed about her ruined reputation. The heavy iron gate slammed shut behind the last departing car, leaving the massive estate consumed by a deafening silence. I stood alone in the dining room, looking at the untouched roasted turkey and the half-empty crystal champagne flutes. I let out a long, steady breath, feeling the crushing weight of a 7-year charade finally lift off my shoulders. I reached for a stack of dirty porcelain plates when the sound of the front door opening made me freeze. I turned around expecting Bradley to have somehow snuck past the cops. Instead, Terrence walked into the foyer. He closed the heavy door quietly behind him and walked straight to the mahogany bar cart in the corner of the room. He grabbed a crystal decanter and poured 2 generous measures of neat bourbon into heavy glasses. He walked over and handed one directly to me. I took the glass, genuinely surprised by his presence. "Where is Monica?" I asked, taking a slow sip. The burn of the bourbon grounded me. "She is waiting in the car," Terrence replied, his deep voice calm and measured. "She is totally on your side, Olivia. She just could not handle watching her mother have a complete psychological breakdown on the front lawn. But I needed to come back inside and tell you something." Terrence, always the sharp, meticulous forensic accountant, leaned against the edge of the dining table. He took a sip of his drink and looked at me with a profound sense of respect. "I knew you were not a data entry clerk 3 years ago. I accidentally saw your tax returns when Bradley asked me to help him apply for a business loan he absolutely did not qualify for." I raised an eyebrow, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "You knew about Horizon LLC." "I knew everything," Terrence said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I saw the corporate filings. I saw the massive capital gains. I saw the medical billing software company valuations. I knew you were working 18-hour days building an empire while Bradley was out playing golf and pretending to close deals. I knew Bradley was a complete fraud living on maximum credit while you quietly funded his entire delusional lifestyle. I just never understood why you let them treat you like garbage for so long." I looked down at my glass, the reflection of the chandelier catching in the bourbon. I loved him once. I thought if I stayed quiet and let him feel like the big provider, he would eventually grow up and be a real partner. But then I found the bank statements for Lexi's Porsche, and I realized I was just an ATM funding his infidelity. Terrence nodded, his expression turning deadly serious. "You played it perfectly tonight. But you need to brace yourself, Olivia. Bradley is broke, desperate, and backed into a corner. Guys like him do not just walk away. He is going to try to burn you to the ground to get his hands on your money." As if the universe heard Terrence's warning, my phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. The screen lit up with a barrage of relentless notifications. I pulled it out and saw 5 missed calls from my corporate attorney. Right below that was an email marked with high importance. The sender was a notorious cutthroat divorce lawyer known for dragging out high-net-worth cases. I opened the email, quickly scanning the aggressive legal jargon. My grip tightened on the phone. "What is it?" Terrence asked, noticing the sudden shift in my posture. "Bradley did not waste any time," I said, my voice turning to ice. "He used the joint credit card he thinks is still active to retain a shark. His lawyer just sent an emergency filing to the court. They are demanding an immediate freeze on all my personal and business accounts." Terrence frowned, setting his glass down. On what grounds he is claiming that Horizon LLC and my medical billing software company are marital property? I read aloud, my eyes skimming the absurd demands. He is officially going after 50% of my shares, the house, and $5 million in spousal support, claiming he sacrificed his career to support my business ventures. Bradley actually thought he could steal the company I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. He thought he could use the legal system to bleed me dry and continue funding his mistress. He thought he had me completely cornered financially. I looked up at Terrence, a dangerous smile touching my lips. Let him try. The crisp morning air of downtown hit my face as I stepped out of my car. I had arrived at my office at 7 sharp, ready to tackle the legal mess Bradley was attempting to create. Horizon Medical Billing Solutions occupied a sleek 3-story glass building right in the heart of the financial district. I owned the building outright, a fact that would soon become very apparent to my soon-to-be ex-husband. It was exactly 9 o'clock when the chaos erupted downstairs. I was reviewing the emergency injunction filed by Bradley's shark of a lawyer when my desk phone buzzed. My head of security, a former Marine named David, spoke with a tight professional tone. "Ma'am, we have a situation in the main lobby. A man claiming to be your husband is causing a severe disturbance. He is demanding to speak with the chief executive officer and refuses to leave the premises." I smiled, closing my laptop. "Keep him contained, David. I will be right down." I smoothed the lapels of my tailored Tom Ford suit. For 7 years, Bradley had only seen me in sweatpants and messy buns, furiously typing away at the kitchen island. He truly believed I was a low-level data entry clerk scraping by on minimum wage. He had clearly used my legal name and the LLC documents from last night to track down the corporate address this morning. I could only imagine the shock on his face when his GPS led him not to a dingy strip mall, but to a prime piece of commercial real estate. The VIP elevator glided silently down to the ground floor. When the polished steel doors slid open, the scene in the lobby was nothing short of cinematic. Bradley was red in the face, screaming at my terrified receptionist. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he bellowed, slamming his fist against the marble front desk. "I am a top-tier commercial real estate broker. I know exactly how these cheap shell companies operate. You go tell whatever sleazy boss is running this scam operation to bring my wife out here right now. She is stealing my assets and I am not leaving until I get what is mine." He waved his arms wildly, completely oblivious to the sophisticated surroundings. The lobby was lined with expensive modern art, towering indoor plants, and a massive digital display showcasing our healthcare partners. It was not a cheap operation. It was a multi-million-dollar enterprise. 2 of my burly security guards approached him, their expressions stern. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and step away from the desk," David instructed firmly. Bradley scoffed, puffing out his chest. "I am not going anywhere. Call your CEO down here right now. I demand to speak to the person in charge. You are speaking to her." My voice sliced through the chaotic lobby like a blade. Bradley spun around. His mouth fell open, his eyes widening in absolute disbelief. I stepped out of the elevator bay, my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The security guards immediately stepped back, giving me a respectful nod. The receptionist let out a sigh of relief. "Good morning, Olivia," she said softly. Bradley looked from the receptionist to the security guards, and then finally back to me. He took in my expensive suit, the immaculate blowout, and the undeniable aura of authority I commanded in the space. He looked up at the 3 stories of glass and steel surrounding us, the realization slowly washing over his arrogant face. "This is a joke," Bradley stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You do not work here. You type numbers into spreadsheets. You do not even own a business suit." I walked slowly toward him, stopping just a few feet away. I crossed my arms, looking him up and down with deep pity. "You really are a terrible commercial real estate broker, Bradley. You are standing inside a building valued at $12 million, a building that houses the medical billing software company I founded 7 years ago, the same company that handles transactions for 40 major hospitals across the country. I am not just the CEO, I am the sole shareholder." Bradley stumbled backward as if I had physically struck him. The security guards grabbed his shoulders and forced him down into one of the velvet guest chairs. He did not fight them. He just stared at me, his breathing shallow and rapid. 7 years of his condescending remarks, his financial abuse and his delusions of grandeur evaporated in the span of 30 seconds. He had spent our entire marriage acting like a king, completely blind to the fact that he was living with an emperor. I thought the humiliation would break him. I expected him to hang his head and walk out the door in shame. But I had underestimated the sheer depth of his toxic greed. The initial shock on his face slowly morphed into a twisted, greedy smirk. He shook off the security guards and leaned forward in the velvet chair. His eyes gleamed with a sickening calculation. "You know what Olivia Bradley said?" His voice dripping with malice. "This is actually perfect. It is even better than I thought." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you having a psychotic break right here in my lobby?" He laughed, a harsh grating sound. "My lawyer filed the paperwork this morning. Since you built this entire glorious empire while we were legally married, that makes this company marital property. I do not care how many hospitals you service. I do not care if you own the building. I am going to take half of this damn company. I am going to take half of your profits, half of your assets, and half of everything you have ever worked for. You just guaranteed my early retirement." He stood up, adjusting his cheap tie, suddenly acting like he owned the place. "I will see you in court, partner." Before I could respond to his pathetic threat, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a message from Terrence. He had sent a screenshot with the text, "You need to see this immediately. Lexi is going nuclear." I opened the image. It was a public Facebook post from Lexi, completely unrestricted and already gaining hundreds of shares. She had posted a picture of her arm wrapped in a bandage alongside a lengthy, tearful paragraph. "I can no longer stay silent," Lexi had written. "The woman my boyfriend is divorcing is a monster. She is a violent, abusive narcissist who physically attacked me in my own home last night. She kicked us out into the freezing cold because she is a miserable, barren woman who cannot stand to see us happy and expecting a child. Please share this so the world knows the truth about this vicious CEO." I stared at the screen, reading the blatant lies. She had tagged my company's official business page. She was actively trying to destroy my professional reputation and tank my company's valuation before the ink on the divorce papers was even dry. Bradley watched my face, his smirk widening. "Whatever you are looking at, I guarantee it is just the beginning. We are going to bleed you dry, Olivia." I looked up from the phone, locking eyes with my delusional husband. I did not scream. I did not panic. I just smiled, a terrifying, icy smile that made Bradley step back toward the exit. "David," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on Bradley, "escort this man off my property. If he steps foot on this pavement again, have him arrested." Bradley turned and marched out the glass doors, chest puffed out fully, believing he had won the war. He had no idea that he was walking straight into a legal slaughterhouse. He had completely forgotten the one document that was going to turn his greedy little dream into an absolute nightmare. The mahogany conference table felt like a battlefield. I sat perfectly still next to my attorney, a seasoned litigator who had seen every dirty trick in corporate and family law. Across from us sat Bradley, practically vibrating with arrogance. He was wearing a different expensive suit today, probably bought on the credit card I had already reported as stolen. Next to him was his shark of a lawyer, a man notorious for dragging out high-net-worth divorces until the opposing party bled dry. Bradley's lawyer slid a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. "My client is willing to be reasonable." The lawyer began, his voice dripping with false diplomacy. "Since the medical billing software company and the commercial real estate it occupies were acquired and grown during the marriage, they are unequivocally marital assets. We are demanding a 50% division of all corporate shares, immediate transfer of half the liquid assets, and $5 million in spousal support to maintain the standard of living my client has grown accustomed to." Bradley leaned back in his plush leather chair, crossing his arms with a triumphant smirk. He looked at me as if I were a helpless deer caught in a trap. "You should just sign it," Olivia Bradley said, feigning sympathy. You hid this massive fortune from me for years. The judge is going to destroy you for financial deception. Plus, after Lexi's post about your abusive behavior goes viral, your company valuation will plummet anyway. Take the deal before you lose everything. I did not look at the papers. I looked at my lawyer and gave him a single subtle nod. My attorney calmly pushed Bradley's ridiculous demands aside. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single crisp document. He placed it gently in the center of the table. I am afraid your client has a severe case of selective amnesia, my lawyer stated, pushing the document closer to Bradley's attorney. This is the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 3 months before the wedding. Bradley rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, obnoxious laugh. A prenup? Are you kidding me? I signed that piece of garbage when I thought she was just a broke data entry clerk. A judge will throw that out in 5 seconds because she failed to disclose her true net worth. My attorney smiled, a predator showing its teeth. Actually, full financial disclosure was provided in the appendix, which your client clearly never read. But more importantly, we are invoking Section 4, Paragraph 2, the infidelity clause. Bradley's lawyer frowned, quickly scanning the highlighted text. The clause was ironclad. It clearly stated that if either party engaged in an extramarital affair, they immediately forfeited any and all rights to marital assets, business holdings, real estate, and spousal support. They would walk away with exactly what they brought into the marriage, which in Bradley's case was absolutely nothing. Bradley slammed his hand on the table, his face turning red. This is a desperate bluff. You have no proof of anything. I have been a devoted husband. Lexi is just my assistant. Her staying over was strictly professional, and any claims of an affair are pure defamation. You cannot prove a damn thing, Olivia. You are just trying to save your precious money. I slowly opened the sleek silver laptop sitting in front of me. I turned the screen so it faced Bradley and his attorney directly. When you live in a house owned by a corporate entity that handles sensitive medical billing data, Bradley, you have to comply with strict security protocols. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. That includes internal surveillance cameras in the main living areas. Cameras you never noticed because you were too busy admiring yourself in the mirrors. I hit the play button. The high-definition full-color video filled the screen. The timestamp clearly showed it was from 3 weeks ago, right in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The footage showed Bradley and Lexi walking into my living room. It showed them aggressively tearing off their clothes. It showed them engaging in highly explicit, undeniable intimacy right there on my custom Italian leather sofa. The audio was crystal clear, capturing Bradley making specific, degrading comments about how stupid his wife was while he showered his mistress with affection. The color drained from Bradley's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He stared at the screen in absolute horror as his entire multi-million-dollar extortion plan evaporated before his eyes. His attorney, however, reacted instantly. The lawyer slammed his pen down on the table, his face twisting in genuine fury. He turned to Bradley, his eyes blazing with professional rage. "You lied to me," the attorney hissed through clenched teeth. "You sat in my office, looked me in the eye, and swore on your life there was no infidelity and no prenuptial agreement. You exposed my firm to severe legal sanctions by having me file fraudulent motions based on your lies." The attorney abruptly stood up and began stuffing his documents back into his briefcase with violent, aggressive motions. "We are done here. I am withdrawing as your counsel effective immediately. Do not ever contact my office again. You will be receiving an invoice for my wasted time by the end of the day." Bradley panicked, reaching out to grab his lawyer's sleeve. "Wait, you cannot just leave me here. We can figure this out. We can fight the video." The lawyer yanked his arm away as if Bradley had a contagious disease. "Fight a time-stamped high-definition security video. You are on your own, buddy. Have a nice life." The heavy conference room door slammed shut, leaving Bradley sitting completely alone on his side of the table. I closed my laptop with a soft click. The sound echoed loudly in the tense silence of the room. You demanded $5 million and half my company, I said, looking at the broken, pathetic man sitting across from me. But according to the document you signed, you get nothing. No house, no money, no spousal support. You walk away with the exact amount of dignity you brought into this room, which is zero. Bradley stared blankly at the polished mahogany table. He had no lawyer, no leverage, and no money. He slowly stood up, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat, and walked out of the room, empty-handed, leaving his dreams of a billionaire lifestyle shattered on the floor. Bradley walking out of that conference room empty-handed was a massive legal victory, but the war was far from over. Cynthia, realizing her golden child was entirely cut off from my millions, went into absolute overdrive. If she could not legally extort me through the divorce courts, she was going to completely destroy my reputation. She could not use lawyers anymore, so she weaponized the only thing she had left: her social status. I spent the next 2 weeks practically living in my corner office. 18-hour workdays became my new normal. I drank black espresso by the gallon, pacing the length of my glass boardroom, firing off emails, holding emergency meetings with my public relations team, and doing everything in my human power to contain the blazing inferno Cynthia had ignited. Cynthia used her platinum membership at the Oakwood Country Club as a command center. She held court in their extravagant dining room every single afternoon, sipping expensive martinis and playing the role of the devastated, loving mother. She spun a wildly fabricated narrative to anyone wealthy enough to listen. According to her, I was a master manipulator. I was a corporate fraud who had secretly transferred Bradley's hard-earned real estate commissions into hidden offshore accounts to fund my tech startup. She painted her son as the dedicated, trusting husband who had been financially gutted by a sociopathic con artist. Lexi, eager to secure her spot in Cynthia's good graces, amplified the lies. She kept sharing her ridiculous victim posts on social media, which Cynthia's wealthy friends eagerly reposted and circulated. They were creating a perfect, highly toxic storm. In the cutthroat world of medical billing software, trust, transparency, and strict compliance are everything. You absolutely cannot service 40 major hospitals and handle billions in medical transactions if there is even a whisper of financial impropriety attached to your name. Cynthia knew exactly what she was doing. She was not just gossiping. She was deliberately striking at the structural integrity of Horizon Medical Billing Solutions. Her malicious rumors quickly began to gain serious traction. It started with hushed whispers at society galas, but then the panic seeped into my boardroom. 2 of my early-stage angel investors requested urgent, unscheduled virtual meetings. These were older conservative men who moved in the exact same elite social circles as my mother-in-law. When their faces appeared on my monitor, they did not look friendly. They expressed deep fundamental concern about the stability of my leadership. One of the investors, a man who had backed me financially 3 years ago, bluntly threatened to pull his funding. He aggressively cited a morality clause in our initial contract, demanding an immediate buyout of his shares. He claimed he could not risk the potential fallout of a federal investigation, completely buying into the embezzlement rumors circulating at his golf club. I sat at my massive desk, rubbing my temples until they ached. I had spent 7 years building an unblemished, stellar corporate record. I had sacrificed my sleep, my youth, and my sanity to build a flawless enterprise, and this bitter, narcissistic woman was attempting to burn it to the ground with nothing but country club gossip. I deployed my crisis management team to draft a firm press release denying all allegations, but I knew deep down that fighting elite societal rumors with sterile corporate statements was a losing battle. I needed to cut the head off the snake entirely. I needed leverage against Cynthia. I needed something so radioactive, so utterly destructive, that it would force her to shut her mouth permanently and retreat into the shadows. As I was strategizing my next move, my private cell phone vibrated sharply on the desk. It was an encrypted text message from Terrence. The message was incredibly short and highly uncharacteristic for my usually calm, methodical brother-in-law. Drop everything you are doing right now, the text read. Meet me at the Rusty Spoon coffee shop on the edge of the industrial district in 20 minutes. Come completely alone. Tell your private security detail to wait down the street. Do not tell anyone where you are going. I grabbed my cashmere coat and rushed out the door. The coffee shop was a small, dimly lit place tucked away in a grimy alley far from the pristine financial district and miles away from the affluent, manicured suburbs. It was the absolute last place anyone from Cynthia's snobby social circle would ever be caught dead visiting. I pushed open the creaky wooden door. The bell chimed softly. I immediately spotted Terence sitting in a dark back booth, his broad shoulders hunched over a steaming mug of black coffee. He was wearing a plain gray hoodie, looking nothing like the polished forensic accountant I knew. I slid into the vinyl booth across from him. Terence did not smile. He did not ask how my day was going. He scanned the empty cafe, his eyes darting toward the windows, ensuring absolutely no one was paying attention to us. Then he reached down to the floor and hoisted a massive, thick leather briefcase onto the sticky table. The heavy thud made the coffee cups rattle. Terence unclasped the metal locks with a sharp snap. He opened the briefcase, revealing hundreds of pages of highlighted financial documents, bank statements, ledger printouts, and property deeds. Terence looked me dead in the eye, his expression completely grave. "You have been playing defense for the last 2 weeks, Olivia." Terence said, his voice a low, intense whisper, as he pushed the massive stack of papers across the table toward me. "But it is time to go on the absolute offensive. You need to see exactly how Cynthia has been funding her little country club lifestyle all these years, because the reality hiding in these folders is going to blow your mind." I stared at the mountain of paperwork spilling out of Terence's briefcase. My eyes locked onto the bold red stamps on the top folders. I reached across the sticky table and pulled the first stack toward me. As a CEO who deals with complex financial structures every single day, I know how to read a balance sheet. But what I was looking at defied all logic. Terence leaned back in the vinyl booth, crossing his muscular arms. He watched my expression shift from confusion to absolute shock. "You see it now," he said, his voice a low rumble over the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. "For the last 7 years, Cynthia has paraded around that country club, acting like American royalty. She loves to brag about the sacred family trust fund. She acts like she comes from endless generational wealth." I flipped to the next page, tracing my finger down a column of catastrophic numbers. The withdrawals were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars bleeding out of the accounts year after year. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, country club membership fees, and massive cash transfers directly to Bradley to fund his fake real estate broker lifestyle. "The family trust fund is completely empty," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cafe noise. "The ending balance on this statement from 5 years ago is literally 0. She has been bankrupt for 5 years. Terence nodded grimly, completely drained. She bled the accounts dry, trying to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. Bradley and Cynthia have been living on absolute fumes. When the trust money ran out, they turned to high-interest credit cards and predatory personal loans. But even that was not enough to sustain their massive burn rate. They needed serious capital to keep up appearances. I looked up at him, my mind racing. Then how has she been paying for her platinum memberships? How is she still hosting those extravagant charity galas? Where is the cash coming from? Terence reached into the briefcase and pulled out a single thick manila envelope. He placed it deliberately in the center of the table. He tapped the cover with his index finger. "This is the masterpiece of their financial fraud." To keep the country club facade alive, Cynthia did the one thing her father explicitly forbade in his original will. She mortgaged the family crown jewel. I opened the envelope and pulled out the deed and loan origination documents. It was the historic commercial building downtown, the grand neoclassical property that housed the elite society events Cynthia loved to host. It was the absolute core of her identity, and the only real asset her family actually had left. "She took out a massive commercial mortgage against the building 4 years ago," Terence explained. "Millions of dollars in cash pulled directly out of the property equity. She and Bradley burned through every single cent of that loan to fund their fake luxury lives. They bought cars, threw parties, and bought silence. But here is the fatal flaw in their brilliant plan. Commercial mortgages require massive monthly payments, and since neither Cynthia nor Bradley actually works, they have defaulted. I flipped to the final document in the folder. My breath caught in my throat. It was an official notice from the largest commercial bank in the state. The bold black letters across the top of the page spelled out a single devastating reality: pre-foreclosure. They are 90 days past due on the mortgage, Terrence stated, his eyes locked on mine. The bank has officially initiated the pre-foreclosure process. The grace period is over. In exactly 3 weeks, the bank is going to seize that historic building and put it up for public auction. Cynthia is about to lose the only piece of leverage she has left in polite society. Once that building goes to auction, the entire city will know she is a total fraud. I sat back in the booth, the sheer magnitude of their hypocrisy washing over me. Cynthia was sitting in the Oakwood Country Club right now, sipping a martini, and telling her wealthy friends that I was a corporate embezzler. She was actively trying to destroy my medical billing software company by claiming I stole money from her son. Meanwhile, she was the one drowning in toxic debt, hiding a catastrophic bankruptcy, and mere days away from having her family legacy seized by the bank. She was projecting, I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. She is trying to ruin my reputation because she knows her own is about to implode. She is desperate for a scapegoat. She thought if Bradley could successfully steal half of my company in the divorce, they could use my millions to pay off the bank and save her precious building. Terrence nodded. You were their winning lottery ticket, Olivia. But you cut them off. Now they are completely trapped. I carefully gathered the documents and placed them back into the folders. I had walked into this grimy coffee shop feeling like I was playing defense against a master manipulator. I was walking out holding the absolute key to her complete destruction. Cynthia wanted to play a high-stakes game of reputation and wealth. I was going to show her what real financial power looked like. Thank you, Terrence, I said, sliding the heavy briefcase toward my side of the table. You just gave me exactly what I need to end this. Terrence gave me a small, respectful salute. Just promise me you will make it hurt. Monica and I are completely done with their toxicity. Burn it all down. I stood up, gripping the handle of the briefcase. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I walked out of the coffee shop and back out into the cold city air. My private security detail was waiting halfway down the block, exactly where I had instructed them to park. I climbed into the back seat of my luxury SUV, my mind already formulating a ruthless corporate strategy to acquire Cynthia's defaulted debt. As my driver merged into the downtown traffic, the serene silence of the car was broken by the sharp buzz of my cell phone. I pulled it out of my coat pocket. It was a direct message notification from Instagram. My public relations manager had just sent me a screenshot with a single word attached: urgent. I opened the image. It was a post from Lexi's public Instagram account. She had bypassed all privacy settings, ensuring the post was visible to everyone, including Bradley's family, my corporate investors, and the entire city's social circle. The image was a crystal-clear black and white medical ultrasound photo. In the background of the photo, you could see the distinct leather interior of Bradley's car. Lexi had tagged Bradley's official account right in the center of the ultrasound image. Below the photo was a caption written with maximum toxic intent. The real heir to the fortune has arrived. Forget the bitter ex-wife. We are building a true legacy. Baby boy coming soon. I stared at the screen, reading the caption twice. Lexi honestly believed she had secured her bag. She thought this baby was her golden ticket to a lifetime of luxury country clubs and endless trust fund cash. She thought she had won the ultimate prize by stealing my husband. She had absolutely no idea that the fortune she was bragging about was completely non-existent. She had no idea she was tying herself to a broke, fraudulent man who was days away from total financial ruin. I locked my phone screen and let out a cold, sharp laugh. The game had just escalated, and I was holding all the winning cards. Lexi sat in the cramped, overpriced hotel room Bradley had rented after the police escorted them off my property. She stared at her phone screen, eagerly waiting for the congratulations to roll in from Cynthia's country club circle. Instead, Bradley stormed through the door, his face flushed with a toxic mix of panic and pure rage. His credit cards were declining across the city. The reality of his frozen assets was finally setting in. Lexi, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse crashing down around them, held up her phone and smiled. She demanded they start touring luxury penthouses downtown immediately. She insisted the baby needed a grand nursery, a space fitting for the heir of a highly successful commercial real estate mogul. Bradley snapped. The polished, charming facade he had worn for 7 years shattered completely. He hurled his leather briefcase across the room, screaming at her with vitriol he had never dared to use on me. He called her a naive gold digger. He blamed her for ruining his marriage and costing him his comfortable rent-free lifestyle. He screamed that there were no penthouses, no trust funds, and absolutely no millions waiting for them. Lexi was stunned, shrinking back against the cheap hotel bedding, but her greed quickly overrode her common sense. She assumed Bradley was just lying, trying to hide his massive fortune from her during the messy divorce proceedings. She decided to take matters into her own hands and confront the one person she believed was hoarding all the wealth. 2 hours later, my head of security called my office line. David informed me that a young woman matching Lexi's description was causing a massive scene in the main lobby. She was threatening to call local news outlets right there on the polished marble floor if I did not grant her an immediate audience. I instructed David to escort her up to the top floor. I wanted to see her delusion up close. The elevator doors opened, and Lexi marched into my glass-walled office. She was wearing designer maternity clothes she had clearly charged to Bradley's maxed-out accounts just days ago. She slammed her designer handbag onto my desk, glaring at me with entirely unearned confidence. She demanded a seat, but I did not offer one. I remained seated behind my executive desk, my hands folded perfectly. Lexi crossed her arms, adopting a stance she probably thought looked incredibly intimidating. She laid out her extortion plan with staggering arrogance. She told me she had already drafted a press release and contacted 2 major tabloid journalists. She threatened to sell a highly fabricated story about how I was a cold, ruthless corporate machine who forcefully threw my husband onto the freezing streets the exact moment I found out he was expecting a child with a younger, prettier woman. She claimed the negative publicity would destroy my medical billing software company and send my investors running for the hills. She demanded a $2 million settlement to keep her mouth shut, walk away, and raise the child quietly without destroying my corporate reputation. I listened to her entire amateur blackmail pitch without blinking once. When she finally finished her monologue, gasping slightly for air, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a single neatly stapled document. I slid it across the smooth glass surface toward her. Lexi looked down, expecting to see a massive check or a non-disclosure agreement ready for her signature. Instead, she found a legally binding auto loan contract. I leaned forward, locking eyes with the panicked 24-year-old. You really should read the fine print before you sign financial documents at a luxury car dealership, Lexi. Did Bradley tell you he was buying that brand new Porsche for you in cash? Did he tell you it was a lavish gift from his massive real estate fortune? Lexi swallowed hard, her eyes rapidly scanning the complex financial jargon on the page. He did not buy you anything? I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the glass walls. Bradley took out a massive high-interest loan for $120,000. But since Bradley has zero actual assets, a mountain of hidden debt, and a terrible credit score, the dealership required a secondary guarantor. Bradley used his smooth-talking charm to rush you through the paperwork while you were blinded by the shiny new car and his fake wealth. Look at the bottom of the page. You are not the registered owner of a luxury vehicle. You are the legal co-signer on a massive auto loan. Lexi stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. the color entirely drained from her youthful face as she stared at her own signature on the dotted line. I kept my tone mercilessly steady, twisting the knife. My lawyer officially froze all of Bradley's bank accounts yesterday afternoon. He cannot even pay for his cheap hotel room, let alone a luxury vehicle payment. That means the bank is coming directly for you. You are legally responsible for every single cent of that $120,000 debt. You are not securing a penthouse today. You are about to have your wages garnished, your credit completely destroyed, and that car repossessed by the end of the week. You attached your entire financial future to a bankrupt fraud. Lexi collapsed into the guest chair she had previously demanded. She began to hyperventilate, the arrogant facade melting into absolute terror. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a runaway freight train. She was pregnant, completely broke, and legally chained to a mountain of toxic debt created by a man who was currently verbally abusing her. She realized she was not the winner of a wealthy prize. She was the ultimate victim of his desperate financial scam. "Get out of my office," I commanded, pointing sharply toward the door. "And if you ever threaten me or my company again, my legal team will sue you for extortion and harassment so fast you will not have time to pack your bags." Lexi did not say a single word. She grabbed her purse with trembling hands and fled the room, looking like her entire world had just collapsed. I watched her disappear into the elevator bay. I felt absolutely zero pity for her. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct line to my senior investment manager. The line clicked open immediately. "Listen to me carefully," I instructed, my voice sharp and entirely focused on the ultimate prize. "I need you to execute the corporate buyout strategy we discussed. I want you to locate the exact commercial bank holding the defaulted mortgage for Cynthia's historic downtown building. Purchase that bad debt immediately, no matter the premium they demand. Do it through our anonymous shell company. I want to own that specific piece of paper by the end of the business day." I set down the phone and took a deep, centering breath. The sheer momentum of the morning was intoxicating, but the universe was not finished handing me ammunition. 30 minutes after I ordered the acquisition of Cynthia's bad debt, my executive assistant buzzed my intercom. Representatives from Vanguard Health Systems had arrived for a highly classified meeting. I had been negotiating with their corporate acquisition team for 6 months in absolute secrecy. Bradley was so thoroughly convinced I was a low-level data entry clerk that he never once bothered to look at my daily calendar, completely missing the fact that I was actively courting the largest healthcare tech conglomerate in North America. 4 men in immaculate tailored suits walked into my glass-walled office. Their lead negotiator, a sharp-eyed executive with a reputation for aggressive corporate takeovers, did not waste any time with pleasantries. He opened his sleek leather briefcase and slid a heavy-bound contract across my desk. He informed me that their board of directors had unanimously approved the final valuation of my medical billing software company. They were offering a complete buyout. The number printed in bold black ink on the final page of the summary was $40 million. I kept my expression entirely neutral, betraying absolutely none of the electric triumph coursing through my veins. $40 million in liquid cash stock options and a guaranteed seat on their executive advisory board. Bradley had just completely incinerated his entire life, trying to extort $5 million from me in a messy, heavily contested divorce proceeding. He had thrown away his marriage for a cheap affair and a mountain of toxic car debt. Meanwhile, I was quietly securing generational wealth right under his oblivious nose. I signed the letter of intent with a steady hand. However, I instituted one non-negotiable condition. The entire acquisition had to remain under a strict, ironclad, non-disclosure agreement until the final ink was dry next week. Absolutely no press releases, no industry whispers. I needed Bradley and his greedy mother to remain entirely blind to the staggering amount of capital I now wielded. Just as the Vanguard executives shook my hand and exited the boardroom, my private cell phone lit up with a secure message from my senior investment manager. He had executed my earlier command with ruthless efficiency. Utilizing a highly insulated shell company we had established years ago for tax purposes, my team had approached the commercial bank holding the defaulted mortgage on Cynthia's beloved historic downtown building. Banks despise carrying toxic, non-performing assets on their books, especially when the debtor is 90 days delinquent and completely bankrupt. When my shell company offered to purchase the distressed debt at a premium cash price, the bank jumped at the opportunity to offload the massive liability. The digital transfer was complete. My investment manager sent over the digital scans of the commercial promissory note and the deed of trust. I downloaded the files and forwarded a secure copy to Terrence. My brother-in-law replied 2 minutes later with a single thumbs-up emoji and a message reading that she has absolutely no idea the bank sold her out. I opened the legal files on my massive desktop monitor. I read the heavy legal jargon very carefully, savoring every single syllable. The bank no longer owned the historic building where Cynthia hosted her extravagant high society events. I owned the debt. I held the absolute legal right to foreclose on the property, seize the physical asset, and evict the current occupant without a single warning. In the span of a single afternoon, I had transformed from the despised, mocked daughter-in-law into Cynthia's sole undisputed financial executioner. Terrence had handed me the exact blueprint of their financial fraud. Now I held the actual weapon. Cynthia had bled her family trust dry to maintain a pathetic illusion of grandeur, but that illusion was currently sitting in a digital folder on my encrypted hard drive. She was living on borrowed time, completely unaware that the clock had already run out. I expected Cynthia to be hiding in her suburban rental, panicking over her rapidly deteriorating social status and Bradley's sudden lack of funds. I underestimated the sheer terrifying depth of her narcissistic delusion. Late that afternoon, a specialized courier arrived at my corporate headquarters. He bypassed the standard mailroom and insisted on handing a package directly to my head of security. David brought the sleek matte black envelope up to my office, his expression highly skeptical. I sliced open the heavy cardstock envelope with a silver letter opener. Inside was a ridiculously lavish gold-embossed invitation. The thick textured paper practically reeked of desperate pretension. It was an exclusive invitation to the annual Winter Charity Gala, and the venue, listed in elegant calligraphy, was none other than the historic downtown commercial building. The very building she no longer had any legal right to occupy. The building that now fundamentally belonged to me. Cynthia was not just continuing her fake philanthropic charade, she was doubling down. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the back of the invitation that truly highlighted her absolute detachment from reality. She had written the note on her personalized, expensive stationery. "I thought you might want a final glimpse of how true high society operates before you fade back into your pathetic, miserable little life," the note read. "You may have thrown my son out of your house, but you will never possess the class, the wealth, or the profound influence of this family. Feel free to stand outside the velvet ropes and watch." I stared at the handwritten note, a cold, dangerous thrill washing over me. Cynthia honestly believed she had won. She believed she could publicly humiliate me one last time, using her grand charity gala as a weapon to assert her dominance and prove her untouchable status to her wealthy friends. She thought she was untouchable because she was standing inside a fortress of generational wealth. She had absolutely no idea that the fortress was built on quicksand. She had no idea that the woman she just invited to stand outside the velvet ropes was the actual owner of the entire building. She wanted a public spectacle. She wanted an audience of elite investors, local politicians, and country club snobs to witness her triumph. I smiled, tracing the gold-embossed lettering on the pristine invitation. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I was going to attend her little charity gala, and I was going to perform a highly public, entirely legal execution of her entire fake empire. My phone vibrated aggressively against the marble countertop of my bathroom vanity. It was a rapid, relentless succession of notifications. I did not need to look at the caller identification to know exactly who was having a complete mental breakdown on the other end of the line. Bradley was entirely cut off from my bank accounts, living out of a budget motel on the highway, yet his inflated ego remained completely intact. I picked up the device and watched his unhinged text messages flood my locked screen. "Do not even think about showing up tonight," the first message read. "I saw the charity gala guest list. You do not belong in that building." The second message arrived a second later. "You are a nobody. You have zero class and zero breeding. You will look like an absolute clown trying to rub shoulders with my family's elite investors." And then the third: "Stay home, Olivia. Save yourself the humiliation. You do not have the pedigree to walk past those velvet ropes. You are just a bitter ex-wife desperately trying to crash a society event where you are completely unwanted." I stared at the glowing screen. Bradley honestly believed his aggressive words still carried weight. He thought he could bully me into submission from a stained mattress in a roadside motel. He was clinging to the pathetic illusion that his family represented the pinnacle of high society, completely ignoring the fact that his mother's historic building was legally sitting in my investment portfolio. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply swiped the notifications away and locked the screen. Absolute silence is the most devastating weapon you can use against a narcissist who is rapidly losing his grip on reality. I turned my attention back to the massive brightly lit mirror in my master suite. I was not just getting dressed for a Friday night charity gala. I was physically armoring myself for a highly calculated, ruthless corporate execution. I had hired an elite, strictly confidential styling team for the evening. These were not local salon workers. They were top-tier professionals who frequently prepared A-list executives and high-profile figures for international media appearances. I paid them double their premium rate to ensure absolute perfection. My makeup was applied with surgical precision. It was sharp, striking, and commanded immediate authority. My hair was swept up into a sleek, flawless style that exuded power. Then came the wardrobe. I did not pull a dress off a department store rack. I stepped into a custom emerald green haute couture gown that I had flown in specifically for this exact occasion. The heavy silk material hugged my frame, perfectly flowing down to the floor like liquid glass. It was a garment designed to dominate a room the absolute second the wearer walked through the door. But the dress was merely the canvas. The true statement was sitting inside a heavy reinforced velvet box on my vanity. I opened the lid, and the brilliant overhead lights caught the blinding sparkle of flawless certified stones. It was a custom diamond necklace with matching cascading drop earrings. The price tag on these specific jewels vastly exceeded the total absolute maximum value of Cynthia's entirely depleted trust fund. I was not wearing these diamonds to look pretty. I was wearing them as a highly visible, undeniable declaration of extreme liquid capital. Cynthia and Bradley loved to play dress-up with borrowed money and high-interest credit cards. They loved to project an image of generational wealth while quietly drowning in toxic debt. I was about to walk into their fake kingdom wearing the undeniable proof of $40 million in self-made, fully realized wealth. I slipped the cold, heavy diamonds around my neck and fastened the clasp. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. A 33-year-old chief executive officer stared back at me completely devoid of fear or hesitation, fully prepared to perform a public autopsy on a family of frauds. I picked up my designer clutch and walked out of my estate. The crisp night air rushed past me as I stepped onto the driveway. My private security detail was already positioned around a pristine midnight black Maybach. The chauffeur, dressed in an immaculate suit, respectfully opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the buttery leather seat, the cabin entirely soundproofed against the noise of the outside world. As the luxury vehicle glided smoothly toward the historic downtown financial district, I checked my phone one final time. A secure encrypted message from Terrence was waiting for me. "The trap is perfectly set," his text read. "Monica and I are already inside. We have our popcorn ready. Bring the house down, Olivia." I replied with a single simple checkmark. The Maybach turned the corner onto the main downtown avenue. The grand neoclassical architecture of Cynthia's historic building came into view. Cynthia, trapped in her infinite delusion of grandeur, had actually hired a fleet of freelance paparazzi, local society reporters, and event photographers to create a faux red carpet experience outside the entrance. She wanted to heavily document her glorious reign over the city's elite. She wanted the flashbulbs to capture her rubbing shoulders with wealthy donors, desperately hoping the photos would secure a new round of gullible investors for Bradley's fake real estate ventures. The thick red velvet ropes were set up along the wide sidewalk. The hired press corps was already snapping photos as minor socialites and local politicians stepped out of their leased town cars and standard luxury sedans. It was exactly the kind of superficial, heavily orchestrated spectacle Cynthia lived for. My driver did not stop at the back of the line. He bypassed the queue of regular vehicles entirely and steered the massive, imposing Maybach directly up to the VIP curb, stopping mere inches from the red carpet. The sheer commanding presence of the ultra-luxury vehicle immediately hijacked the attention of every single person on the street. The murmurs rippled rapidly through the gathered crowd. Cynthia's hired photographers completely abandoned the minor guests they were currently shooting. They practically shoved each other out of the way, rushing toward my vehicle. Every single camera lens, microphone, and bright flashbulb instantly pivoted, pointing squarely at the tinted rear window of the Maybach, absolutely desperate to capture the first glimpse of the billionaire who was about to step out. The heavy door of the Maybach opened. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement, my emerald green haute couture gown catching the blinding array of camera flashes. The hired press corps erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions and rapid camera clicks, completely ignoring the minor local politicians and socialites who had just walked the red carpet. They parted like the Red Sea as I moved forward, my custom diamond necklace reflecting the chaotic bursts of light. I did not pause for photos. I did not wave. I walked straight past the thick velvet ropes with the absolute authority of a woman who owned the very ground they were standing on. The grand ballroom of the historic downtown building was a masterclass in financial delusion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of elite investors, hospital administrators, and wealthy country club members. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne and imported caviar. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of networking. It was Cynthia's perfect orchestrated fantasy of infinite wealth. The moment I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. It started as a ripple of whispers near the entrance and rapidly spread across the massive ballroom. Heads turned. Conversations abruptly stopped. The elite crowd, having already consumed Cynthia's toxic rumors about my supposed embezzlement and abusive behavior, stared at me with a mixture of shock and sheer morbid curiosity. I kept my posture impossibly straight, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor as I glided directly toward the center of the room. Cynthia was standing near the main stage, holding a glass of champagne and laughing with a group of conservative angel investors. I watched the exact second her eyes locked onto me. The blood drained entirely from her face. Her perfectly manicured hand trembled, nearly spilling her drink. She looked at my custom gown. She looked at the cascading diamonds resting against my collarbone. She knew instantly that these were not rented pieces. She knew she was looking at raw, undeniable capital. But Cynthia was a cornered narcissist, and a cornered narcissist will always double down on the delusion. Instead of retreating, she handed her glass to a passing waiter and marched straight up the steps of the main stage. She signaled the audio technician and grabbed the silver microphone off its stand. The feedback whined sharply, immediately silencing the remaining chatter in the grand hall. Hundreds of wealthy VIP guests turned their attention to the stage. Cynthia plastered a look of profound maternal sorrow across her face. She pressed a hand to her chest, playing the role of the tragic victimized matriarch to absolute perfection. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cynthia projected her voice, letting a manufactured tremor slip into her tone. "I am so deeply sorry for this unfortunate interruption. We gathered here tonight to celebrate philanthropy and community. But it appears we have an unwanted visitor. She pointed a trembling finger directly at me, ensuring every single camera and eyeball in the room followed her gesture. That woman standing there is my son's soon-to-be ex-wife, Olivia. Cynthia announced, her voice echoing through the massive speakers. As many of you know, she has been going through a severe, tragic mental breakdown. She is a deeply disturbed individual who completely fabricated a corporate career to hide her financial crimes against my family. She has been stalking my son and harassing our family ever since we uncovered her embezzlement. I specifically banned her from this venue, yet here she is, a pathetic stalker, trying to crash an exclusive event she has absolutely no business attending. The crowd gasped in unison. Several older socialites actually clutched their pearls, stepping backward as if my mere presence might contaminate them. They looked at me with undisguised pity and revulsion, entirely buying into Cynthia's spectacular theatrical performance. Please, Cynthia continued, wiping a fake tear from the corner of her eye. Do not engage with her. She is dangerous and completely detached from reality. Security, please step forward immediately. Escort this disturbed woman out of my building before she causes any harm to our esteemed guests. 4 large, broad-shouldered event security guards immediately detached themselves from the walls and began marching toward me. The crowd parted widely, giving them a clear, unobstructed path to where I stood. I did not break eye contact with Cynthia. I did not shout in my own defense. I did not try to explain myself to the gullible crowd of country club snobs. I simply stood there in the center of the grand ballroom, radiating icy, untouchable calm. I allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face. I knew something that not a single person in that room knew. I knew the exact time. The lead security guard reached out his hand, inches from gripping my bare arm. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises right now," he ordered gruffly. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my eyes locked on Cynthia's triumphant, gloating face up on the stage. Before the guard's fingers could even brush the silk of my sleeve, a deafening, thunderous crash echoed from the rear of the ballroom. The massive, heavy oak double doors of the historic building were violently shoved open, slamming against the interior walls with a force that made the crystal chandeliers rattle above our heads. The 4 event security guards froze in their tracks, spinning around to face the entrance. The entire ballroom let out a collective gasp of shock. Marching through the grand entrance was not a late VIP guest. It was the city's chief of police, fully dressed in his formal uniform, flanked by 4 heavily armed uniformed officers. Walking directly beside the chief was a stern, sharp-eyed legal representative holding a thick, heavily stamped clipboard. The sheer authority radiating from the police presence instantly paralyzed the room. The music cut off completely. You could hear a pin drop in the massive space. The chief of police bypassed the velvet ropes, bypassed the terrified event staff, and marched straight toward the main stage. He did not look at the wealthy investors. He did not look at the elite socialites. He marched directly up to the base of the stage, glaring up at Cynthia, who was still clutching the microphone with white knuckles. The legal representative stepped forward, raising his voice so it carried clearly to the back of the silent room. "Cynthia, you are hereby served with an immediate, non-negotiable commercial eviction notice," the legal representative barked, holding up the thick stack of court-ordered documents. "This property has been seized due to massive critical default on a commercial mortgage. This entire charity gala is an illegal gathering on privately held foreclosed property. All occupants must vacate the premises immediately or face criminal trespassing charges." Cynthia's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The microphone picked up her ragged, terrified breathing, amplifying it across the ballroom. The elite guests stared at her in absolute horror, the illusion of her generational wealth crumbling right before their eyes. "You have made a mistake," Cynthia shrieked into the microphone, her voice cracking into a desperate, hysterical wail. "You cannot do this to me. I am the owner here." The chief of police did not flinch at Cynthia's hysterical shrieking. He stepped firmly onto the first stair of the main stage and raised his voice, ensuring his command carried effortlessly over the panicked murmurs of the elite crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, the chief announced his deep tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. This commercial property is now under the legal undisputed possession of its primary creditor. You are all currently trespassing on seized foreclosed real estate. I am ordering an immediate and orderly evacuation of this building. Please locate the nearest exit and vacate the premises right now. The grand ballroom descended into absolute unprecedented chaos. The wealthy hospital administrators and conservative angel investors who had been sipping vintage champagne moments ago were now practically sprinting toward the cloakroom. Crystal glasses shattered sharply against the polished marble floor as guests dropped their expensive drinks in a frantic, desperate rush to distance themselves from a massive, highly public financial scandal. No one in high society wants their reputation associated with a police raid and a defaulted mortgage. Cynthia watched her entire carefully curated universe disintegrate in real time. She clawed at her designer gown, her mouth opening and closing silently as her wealthy country club friends abandoned her without offering a single backward glance. Suddenly, a figure shoved his way aggressively through the stampeding crowd. Bradley stormed toward the front of the stage, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged entitlement. He had spent his entire adult life operating under the toxic delusion that rules and consequences simply did not apply to his family. He marched directly up to the chief of police, aggressively pointing his finger right in the officer's face. "You listen to me right now," Bradley barked, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of fake, unearned authority. "I am a top-tier commercial real estate broker. You cannot just march into a private exclusive charity gala and shut it down. My mother owns this historic property. You are making a massive legal mistake, and I will personally see to it that you lose your badge for this outrageous disruption." The chief of police stared at Bradley with absolute unwavering contempt. The legal representative standing beside the chief simply held up the thick stack of foreclosure documents, tapping the bold red ink that confirmed the total asset seizure. "Sir," the officer warned, his hand resting casually on his utility belt, "step back immediately. If you interfere with a court-ordered commercial eviction, you will leave this ballroom in handcuffs and spend your weekend in a holding cell." Bradley, completely blinded by his own toxic arrogance and desperate need to maintain his phony, wealthy persona in front of his fleeing peers, did the absolute worst thing possible. He lunged forward, attempting to physically shove the police officer out of the way to reach the stage and protect his mother. Within a fraction of a second, two heavily armed officers grabbed Bradley by his expensive tailored lapels. They forcefully twisted his arms behind his back and slammed him hard against the edge of the wooden stage. Bradley groaned loudly in pain, his face pressed awkwardly against the polished floorboards as the officers completely neutralized his pathetic, reckless attempt at physical assault. The room was a frantic symphony of destruction and panic, but I remained an island of absolute untouchable calm. I took a slow, deliberate breath and began to walk. The heavy silk of my emerald green haute couture gown brushed elegantly against the marble floor. The few guests who had not yet fled the room backed away quickly, parting like the Red Sea as I moved gracefully toward the main stage. My custom diamond necklace caught the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers parked outside the massive glass windows, sending fractured beams of light dancing across the walls. I did not look at Bradley struggling pathetically against the officers below. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Cynthia. She was standing frozen at the center of the stage, still clutching the silver microphone, shaking so violently she could barely keep herself upright. She watched me ascend the plush-carpeted stairs, one deliberate step at a time. Her eyes were wide with a horrifying, undeniable realization. She finally understood that the timing of this spectacular police raid was not a random coincidence. I walked right up to her. Cynthia shrank back, her fake maternal sorrow entirely replaced by raw, visceral terror. She looked at me not as the frumpy, compliant daughter-in-law she had mocked for 7 years, but as the ruthless corporate executioner I truly was. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and firmly snatched the silver microphone right out of her trembling hand. The audio feedback whined sharply for a split second before I stabilized it. I looked out at the remaining crowd of elite socialites scrambling for the doors, then turned my gaze back to my former mother-in-law. "You were the owner, Cynthia!" I said, my voice echoing with crystal-clear, devastating authority through the massive ballroom speakers. "But you bled your sacred family trust dry and defaulted heavily on your massive commercial mortgage. The bank grew incredibly tired of your pathetic excuses and empty promises. So they sold your toxic debt to an anonymous investment company to cut their losses." Cynthia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as the ultimate devastating truth finally hit her. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the carpet. I smiled, a razor-sharp expression that offered absolutely zero mercy. "And as of 9 o'clock this morning, that investment company belongs entirely to me. This historic building, including the grand banquet hall you are currently standing in, is my personal property. You are trespassing on my real estate." I turned to face the remaining guests and raised my free hand in a welcoming, triumphant gesture. "Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the official celebration party for my absolute financial independence." Cynthia let out a choked, devastated sob and collapsed to her knees on the stage floor, her grand societal reign permanently destroyed in front of the entire city. Down below the stage, the reality of my words penetrated Bradley's thick skull. The sheer magnitude of the immense wealth he had just lost snapped the last remaining thread of his sanity. With a primal, unhinged scream, Bradley violently wrenched himself free from the grip of the momentarily distracted police officers. He vaulted onto the wooden stage, his eyes wild and bloodshot, lunging directly toward me with his hands outstretched to strangle the life out of me. I stood perfectly still, bracing for the inevitable impact. But before his fingers could even brush my neck, a massive, broad-shouldered figure stepped rapidly out from the shadows of the heavy stage curtains. Terrence slammed his body directly into Bradley, tackling the fraudulent broker to the hardwood floor with a bone-crushing thud. The heavy, sickening thud of Bradley hitting the hardwood stage echoed through the grand ballroom. Terrence, leveraging his broad shoulders and absolute calm, pinned my frantic soon-to-be ex-husband squarely to the ground. Bradley thrashed wildly against the polished wood, spitting vile curses, his expensive tailored suit tearing at the shoulder seam. The two police officers, recovering from their momentary distraction, immediately swarmed the stage. They hauled Bradley up by his arms, snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists with a sharp, decisive click that signaled the definitive end of his freedom. Cynthia, still kneeling on the stage floor in her ruined designer gown, watched the scene unfold in absolute horror. But her panic was not for her son being arrested for attempted assault. Her panic was directed entirely at the man who had just tackled him. She scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking violently as she pointed a manicured finger at Terrence. "What are you doing?" Cynthia shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch that pierced the ears of everyone still lingering in the room. "Terrence, you are supposed to protect this family. You are supposed to fix this disaster. Call your bank right now and clear this ridiculous debt. Pay this vindictive woman off and get my son out of those handcuffs immediately. Family protects family. Do your job as my son-in-law and save our legacy before these people ruin us." Terrence slowly stood up, brushing the invisible dust from his impeccable gray suit. He did not look angry. He looked completely and utterly exhausted by her endless toxic delusions. He adjusted his cuffs, his posture radiating the quiet, undeniable authority of a man who dealt strictly in hard facts and undeniable numbers. He stepped past the struggling, handcuffed Bradley and walked directly toward me. I stood my ground, holding the silver microphone loosely in my hand. Terrence met my eyes, giving me a single respectful nod. I handed the microphone over to him, without a second of hesitation. The ballroom fell into a suffocating, heavy silence once again. The few remaining elite investors and high society socialites who had not yet fled to their town cars paused near the grand exit doors. They turned back, captivated by the absolute destruction of the local aristocracy playing out on the stage. Terrence gripped the microphone tightly. He looked down at Cynthia, who was staring up at him with desperate, pleading eyes. fully expecting him to write a multi-million-dollar check to bail out her pathetic vanity project. "You want me to do my job?" Cynthia Terrence asked, his deep voice booming flawlessly through the venue speakers. "I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on tracking missing assets, identifying corporate fraud, and exposing massive financial liabilities to the authorities. So let me do my exact job right here, in front of all your esteemed country club friends and potential investors." Cynthia took a shaky step backward, her hands flying to her mouth as the color completely drained from her face for the second time that night. "With my professional authority, I officially confirm that this family is completely and irreversibly bankrupt," Terrence declared, projecting his voice so every single syllable reached the back of the room. "There is no generational wealth. The sacred family trust fund you constantly brag about has been entirely empty for 5 years. You and Bradley have been funding your lavish fake lifestyles by taking out predatory loans, maximizing high-interest credit cards, and engaging in severe financial deception. You are completely broke, and your credit scores are essentially radioactive." Bradley, currently being dragged toward the stage stairs by the police, thrashed against his restraints. "Shut up, Terrence!" Bradley roared, spit flying from his mouth as the officers forced him forward. "You have no right to discuss our private finances in public." "I have every right," Terrence fired back, his voice slicing through Bradley's pathetic outburst with lethal precision. "Because for the last 2 years, you and your mother have been secretly trying to siphon money from my personal accounts to cover your tracks. You begged me for business loans you never intended to repay. You tried to leverage my pristine credit history to secure new lines of funding for your fake real estate ventures. You viewed my wife and me as your personal, unlimited automated teller machines." Terrence turned his gaze away from the disgraced men and looked directly out into the crowd. I followed his line of sight. Standing near the velvet ropes at the base of the stage was Monica. My sister-in-law looked incredibly small in the massive ballroom, but her posture was rigid with newfound strength. Tears were streaming freely down her cheeks, ruining her elegant makeup, but she did not wipe them away. She looked up at her husband with absolute, unwavering support. As a husband, Terrence continued his tone, shifting from professional detachment to fierce protective loyalty. "Monica and I are officially announcing that we are cutting all financial and emotional ties with both of you. We are done being manipulated. We are done being gaslighted into funding your toxic, narcissistic illusions of grandeur. We will not let you drain another single cent from our family's future. You are completely on your own from this second forward." Down on the floor, Monica nodded her head in firm, undeniable agreement. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at her screaming brother. She simply turned her back on her toxic bloodline and stood tall, finally breaking the cycle of financial abuse that had chained her for decades. Cynthia let out a shallow, ragged gasp. The absolute reality of her situation finally crushed the last remaining pillar of her sanity. She had lost her historic building to me. Her golden child son was being marched out the doors in police handcuffs. And now her final safety net, her wealthy, successful son-in-law, and her compliant daughter had publicly severed all ties. She was entirely isolated, stripped of her wealth, her family, and her precious social standing. The sheer psychological weight of the total destruction hit Cynthia like a physical blow. She let out a weak, pathetic wheeze. Her hands flew up to tightly clutch the heavy fabric over her chest. Her eyes rolled back into her head, fluttering wildly as she lost her balance. Her knees buckled beneath her and she collapsed violently onto the hard wooden floorboards of the stage, her designer gown pooling uselessly around her motionless body. I stood mere feet away, my emerald silk dress perfectly still. I looked out into the crowd of high society elites, hospital administrators, and wealthy investors. In any normal circumstance, a crowd would rush forward to offer medical assistance or comfort to an elderly woman collapsing in distress. But not a single person moved. The wealthy socialites simply stared down at Cynthia with expressions of profound, icy disgust. They clutched their expensive purses and turned away hastily, exiting the ballroom to escape the stench of poverty and fraud. They stepped over her shattered reputation without a second glance. Cynthia lay completely alone on the stage of my building, abandoned by the very elite society she had sacrificed everything to impress. The two heavily armed police officers jerked Bradley upright by his tailored lapels. The metallic clink of the handcuffs securing his wrists behind his back echoed with beautiful poetic finality across the grand stage. Bradley's face was a mask of absolute unadulterated humiliation. He frantically twisted his neck, his eyes darting toward the main entrance where the hired paparazzi and society reporters were aggressively pushing against the velvet ropes. Their long camera lenses zoomed in on the unfolding spectacle, capturing every single pathetic angle of his arrest. The carefully constructed facade of the wealthy, untouchable commercial real estate titan was crumbling rapidly, and Bradley was desperate to hide the debris. He pleaded with the officers, his voice dropping to a pathetic, whiny whisper. He begged them not to parade him through the grand lobby in front of his fleeing peers. He demanded they take him through the rear service corridors, desperate to escape the flashing bulbs and the highly judgmental stares of the very elite investors he had spent years trying to impress. The officers, completely unbothered by his sudden drop in social status, and highly annoyed by his earlier attempt to assault them, simply wanted to remove the hostile suspect from the premises. They aggressively shoved Bradley forward, steering him roughly toward the heavy wooden swinging doors that led to the catering kitchens and the back alley exit. I stood tall on the main stage, my emerald silk gown perfectly immaculate, watching his cowardly, desperate retreat with absolute satisfaction. But the universe was entirely finished extending any mercy to my soon-to-be ex-husband. Just as the police officers pushed open the heavy service doors, a figure aggressively shoved her way inside from the back alley, violently colliding with the arresting officers. It was Lexi. She looked absolutely nothing like the smug, polished assistant who had strutted through my dining room on Thanksgiving evening. The transformation was staggering and deeply pathetic. Her expensive designer maternity coat was improperly buttoned and severely wrinkled. Her carefully highlighted hair was tangled in a chaotic, wind-blown mess. Heavy dark streaks of ruined mascara ran down her cheeks, making her look entirely unhinged. She bypassed the building security, completely driven by a singular, highly destructive rage. Lexi locked her bloodshot eyes onto Bradley. She did not look remotely concerned that the man she believed was her billionaire savior was currently wearing police handcuffs. She marched straight toward him, ignoring the stern warnings of the armed officers who tried to block her path. Bradley panicked, his eyes bulging as he hissed at her to lower her voice frantically, nodding his head toward the lingering journalists who had already redirected their cameras toward the service corridor. Lexi refused to be silenced. She planted her feet firmly on the marble floor and let out a visceral, piercing scream that commanded the attention of every single person left in the venue. She aggressively raised her left hand, her fingers trembling with fury, and violently ripped the massive, glittering engagement ring off her finger. She wound up her arm and hurled the heavy piece of jewelry directly at Bradley. The sharp metal struck him squarely on his cheekbone with a loud smack before clattering uselessly onto the polished floor. Cubic zirconia. Lexi shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure, concentrated venom. "You proposed to me with a worthless lab-grown piece of glass. I just walked into the most exclusive pawn shop in the financial district to sell that rock so I could pay the deposit on the luxury penthouse you promised me." The appraiser literally laughed directly in my face. He told me it was a cheap counterfeit prop. Bradley writhed helplessly in the grip of the police officers, his face burning a dark, humiliating crimson as the rapid clicks of camera shutters documented his ultimate disgrace. He begged her to stop talking desperately, promising he would fix it. But Lexi was entirely finished playing the supportive mistress. The reality of her massive financial liability had broken her completely. She turned her body directly facing the cluster of eager reporters and society bloggers who were aggressively recording every single devastating word. "He is completely broke," Lexi announced to the flashing cameras, ensuring her voice carried across the entire grand ballroom. This so-called commercial real estate mogul is a total fraud. He has been screaming at me inside a cheap motel room for the last 4 hours. He violently demanded that I go to a medical clinic tomorrow morning and terminate my pregnancy because he does not have a single dollar to his name. He told me he cannot even afford to buy basic diapers because he is currently drowning in $200,000 of high-interest credit card debt. Debt that he fraudulently opened under my legal name because his own credit score is completely destroyed. The collective gasp from the remaining elite crowd was deafening. The reporters typed furiously on their glowing smartphones, capturing the scandalous downfall of a man who had spent his entire adult life projecting absolute superiority. Bradley's arrogant aristocratic persona did not just crack, it disintegrated into ash. The wealthy hospital administrators and angel investors, who had once tolerated his presence, now looked at him with absolute unfiltered revulsion. He was no longer just a financial failure who lived off his successful wife. He was publicly exposed as a moral bankrupt, a manipulative predator who coerced young women into financial ruin and then demanded they discard their unborn children the exact second his stolen funding dried up. The image of the powerful young heir vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic, heavily indebted con artist standing in handcuffs. I watched from the stage, observing the precise moment the karma finally caught up to him. He had spent 7 years trying to make me feel small, and now he was being publicly eviscerated by the very woman he chose to replace me. Bradley opened his mouth, desperately searching his empty brain for a single plausible lie to spin his way out of the catastrophic public execution. He wanted to formulate an excuse to blame me, to blame his unconscious mother, to blame anyone but himself. But before a single pathetic syllable could escape his lips, a strange, highly synchronized phenomenon hijacked the entire ballroom. It started as a subtle collective vibration in the pockets and purses of the crowd, then rapidly escalated into a sharp, undeniable symphony of digital sound. Every single smartphone belonging to the elite VIP guests, the aggressive journalists, and the corporate investors rang and chimed at the exact same synchronized second. It was the distinct, piercing alert of a major breaking news push notification. Bradley looked down at the glowing screen of a reporter's phone just a few feet away, his eyes widening in absolute paralyzing terror as he read the bold headline that would seal his ultimate destruction. The sharp, synchronized chiming of 100 smartphones completely hijacked the chaotic atmosphere of the grand ballroom. It was not a localized event. It was a mass, simultaneous push notification from one of the most prestigious financial publications on the planet. The Wall Street Journal mobile application had just issued an emergency breaking news alert to every registered subscriber in the financial district. The wealthy investors, hospital administrators, and aggressive society reporters all instinctively looked down at their glowing screens. The sheer magnitude of the digital alert commanded absolute silence. The frantic whispering stopped. The aggressive camera flashes temporarily paused. The entire room stood perfectly frozen, their eyes rapidly scanning the bold black text, illuminating their devices. Bradley, still firmly restrained by the 2 heavily armed police officers, craned his neck desperately. His breathing was ragged, his face bruised and flushed with utter humiliation. He managed to angle his line of sight toward the glowing screen of the lead society reporter standing mere inches away. The reporter was staring at his smartphone with his mouth completely open, entirely ignoring Lexi's hysterical crying. Bradley focused his bloodshot eyes on the glaring digital headline. The words burned themselves directly into his retinas, permanently destroying the last remaining fragments of his fractured sanity. The Wall Street Journal headline read with absolute devastating clarity: Horizon Medical Billing Solutions acquired by Vanguard Health Systems. Female tech founder and chief executive officer Olivia closes landmark buyout deal for $40 million. The subtitle beneath the massive headline offered even more agonizing detail. The completely self-funded, highly profitable medical software enterprise previously operating in stealth mode finalizes an all-cash and stock acquisition. The brilliant 33-year-old founder secures a guaranteed seat on the Vanguard Executive Advisory Board. Bradley stopped breathing. The oxygen completely evacuated his lungs. He stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. $40 million. $40 million. His mind, usually so adept at spinning lies and calculating petty real estate commissions, short-circuited under the crushing weight of the astronomical figure. He frantically tried to process the mathematical reality of what he was reading. For 7 years, he had treated me like an irrelevant, invisible fixture in his life. He had mocked my comfortable clothing. He had belittled my long hours typing at the kitchen island. He had confidently paraded around his country club, telling his elite friends that I was a pathetic low-level data entry clerk who relied entirely on his supposed commercial real estate wealth. The truth hit him with the destructive force of a nuclear detonation. I was not a data entry clerk. I was a tech titan. I had built a $40 million digital empire from the ground up right under his incredibly arrogant, completely oblivious nose. Bradley's eyes darted frantically around the grand ballroom. He looked at the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, and the massive neoclassical columns. This entire historic building, the absolute crown jewel of his mother's fake generational wealth, now legally belonged to the very woman he had relentlessly degraded. I owned the real estate. I owned the medical billing company. I owned $40 million in liquid capital and corporate stock. And Bradley had absolutely nothing. He had enthusiastically signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement containing a ruthless infidelity clause, fully believing he was protecting his fake family trust fund from a penniless gold digger. He had gleefully engaged in a sloppy, highly documented affair with a 24-year-old assistant on my custom Italian leather sofa. Because of his own toxic arrogance and his inability to keep his vows, he had legally forfeited any potential claim to a $20 million marital settlement. He had traded half of a $40 million corporate empire for a fake cubic zirconia engagement ring and $200,000 of high-interest credit card debt with a panicked pregnant mistress who currently despised him. The sheer unimaginable scale of his colossal financial mistake physically broke him. Bradley's knees violently buckled. His legs entirely lost the ability to support his body weight. He collapsed downward, his expensive tailored trousers hitting the polished hardwood floor of the service corridor. The 2 police officers had to tighten their grips on his arms just to keep his face from smashing directly into the marble baseboards. He hung there in their firm grasp, a pathetic, sobbing, completely ruined man, kneeling in the dirt of the very commercial property that used to serve as his family's ultimate status symbol. Lexi, standing just a few feet away, had also read the headline on a nearby reporter's phone. She let out a hollow, devastated gasp. She looked at Bradley kneeling on the floor in police handcuffs, and then she looked up at the main stage where I stood. She finally realized the astronomical magnitude of the wealth she had tried to extort. She had demanded a pathetic $2 million from a woman who had just deposited $40 million into her bank account. Lexi turned on her heel and sprinted out the back service doors, disappearing into the dark alley, running as far away from Bradley's toxic debt as her designer heels could carry her. The elite crowd in the ballroom turned their collective gaze back to me. The disgust and pity they had directed at me mere minutes ago had entirely vanished. It was instantly replaced by profound, unadulterated awe. In the ruthless world of high society, capital is the ultimate equalizer. I was no longer the scorned, mocked daughter-in-law. I was an apex predator. I was a $40 million tech mogul who had just masterfully executed the most flawless, legally pristine financial slaughter the city had ever witnessed. I slowly descended the plush, carpeted steps of the main stage. The remaining wealthy investors and hospital administrators parted respectfully, giving me a wide, unobstructed path. My emerald green haute couture gown rustled softly against the floor. I walked directly toward the service corridor where Bradley was still kneeling in police custody. I stopped just inches from his defeated, slumping figure. The police officers stood perfectly still, allowing me this final moment. Bradley slowly raised his head. His face was stained with tears and sweat. His eyes were wide, completely shattered, begging for a single ounce of mercy he did not deserve and would never receive. I looked down at him. My expression was entirely devoid of anger, sadness, or vindication. It was simply cold, sharp, and brutally final. Remember to pack up your personal belongings and get them out of my house before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. 3 days had passed since the absolute destruction of Cynthia's charity gala. The fallout had been swift, brutal, and highly publicized across the city's financial sector. I was sitting in the expansive living room of my $2 million estate, thoroughly enjoying the profound, uninterrupted silence. The custom Italian leather sofa that Bradley had polluted had been hauled to the city dump the very next morning, replaced by a pristine white velvet sectional that commanded the center of the room. A massive stone fireplace crackled warmly, casting a soft golden glow across the polished hardwood floors. Outside, a relentless torrential rainstorm was battering the city. The wind howled against the reinforced glass windows, but inside my fortress, the temperature was perfectly regulated. I held a steaming mug of artisanal chamomile tea between my hands, taking a slow, calming sip. For the first time in 7 years, I was not analyzing bank statements to cover a sudden, mysterious overdraft. I was not tiptoeing around a fragile male ego. I was simply existing in a kingdom I had built with my own 2 hands, fueled by the satisfaction of a $40 million corporate acquisition. The serene tranquility of the evening was abruptly broken by a sharp, persistent buzzing from the digital security panel mounted on the marble wall. I set my teacup down on the glass coffee table and walked over to the glowing monitor. The high-definition night vision cameras covering the perimeter of my property displayed a scene so incredibly pathetic it almost defied description. Standing outside the towering wrought iron security gates was Bradley. He was completely unrecognized from the arrogant, polished commercial real estate broker who had strutted through this very house just days prior. He was entirely soaked to the bone, shivering violently in the freezing driving rain. He wore a cheap, wrinkled windbreaker that provided absolutely zero protection against the harsh elements. His hair was plastered flat against his forehead, and his shoulders were slumped in a posture of total, inescapable defeat. He was aggressively pounding his bare fists against the solid iron bars, desperately trying to force his way into a life he had permanently forfeited. I watched him for a long moment through the digital screen. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I reached out and firmly pressed the glowing intercom button, allowing my voice to project clearly through the weatherproof speakers mounted on the stone pillars outside. "What do you want, Bradley?" I asked, my tone flat, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. Bradley flinched visibly at the sound of my voice. He stumbled forward, pressing his wet face against the cold metal bars of the gate. "Olivia, please," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a loud, hysterical sob that echoed over the heavy rainfall. "You have to let me inside. You have to talk to me. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. My bank accounts are completely frozen. The motel kicked me out because my last credit card declined. I am freezing out here. You should have considered your housing arrangements before you engaged in a highly documented affair on my furniture," I replied smoothly. "Your lack of shelter is not my problem. Leave my property line before I notify the authorities." He dropped to his knees right there in the pooling mud. The muddy water splashed against his torn trousers as he gripped the iron bars like a desperate prisoner. "You do not understand," Olivia Bradley cried out, leaning heavily into his classic narcissistic manipulation tactics. "I was not in my right mind. My mother forced me into this lifestyle. Cynthia constantly poisoned my mind against you. She demanded I keep up appearances for her wealthy country club friends. She made me feel totally inadequate. I was under so much pressure to be the perfect, successful son that I completely lost myself. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that translated crisply through the outdoor speakers. "You are 35 years old, Bradley," I stated, slicing through his pathetic excuses with absolute precision. "You chose to sign those predatory loan documents. You chose to buy a luxury sports car you could not afford. You chose to bring a 24-year-old assistant into my home. Cynthia did not force you to unzip your pants, and she certainly did not force you to try and steal 50% of a corporate empire you did not even know existed. You are a grown man who is entirely responsible for his own colossal failures." Bradley sobbed louder, the rain washing the tears down his bruised face. "Lexi meant absolutely nothing to me," he wailed, pounding his forehead against the iron gate. "She was a massive mistake, a trap. She preyed on my financial vulnerabilities. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved. I swear it on my life. We can fix this, Olivia. You have $40 million now. We do not need to worry about the debt anymore. We can finally build the beautiful, wealthy life we always dreamed of. Just open the gate and let me come home." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his greed was actually impressive. Even while kneeling in the freezing mud, utterly destroyed and facing total bankruptcy, his mind was still frantically trying to calculate a way to access my newly acquired fortune. He was not mourning our marriage. He was mourning the loss of his ultimate meal ticket. "The wealthy life I dreamed of never included a parasitic fraud," I answered, my voice dropping to a lethal authoritative register. I reached out and pressed a secondary button on the security console. A loud mechanical whirring sound echoed from the base of the stone pillar outside. A small automated delivery hatch at the bottom of the security gate slowly slid open. Bradley looked down, a sudden, desperate flash of hope illuminating his tired eyes. He probably thought I was sending out a lifeline, a stack of cash, or a key to the guest house. Instead, the automated mechanism shoved a single medium-sized cardboard box out onto the wet pavement. The box landed in a muddy puddle with a dull, heavy thud. "What is this?" Bradley stammered, staring at the soggy cardboard. "I had my security team sweep the master bedroom for the very last of your personal belongings," I explained calmly over the intercom. "Inside that box is your entire collection of fake Rolex watches. The cheap counterfeit garbage you wore to your elite country club meetings to trick everyone into believing you were a titan of industry. It is the perfect representation of exactly who you are, Bradley, a cheap, hollow imitation of value." Bradley stared at the box, his hands shaking violently as the reality of his total expulsion finally crushed his spirit. "Take your garbage and get off my property line," I commanded, delivering the final devastating blow. "You have exactly 60 seconds to remove yourself from my sight before I dispatch the police and press formal charges for criminal trespassing. Do not ever show your face here again." I released the intercom button, cutting off his frantic, desperate wails. I turned my back on the security monitor, walked over to my new velvet sofa, and picked up my warm cup of tea. The storm raged outside, but inside my empire the climate was absolutely perfect. 2 weeks after the spectacular collapse of her fake empire, the bank finally finalized the foreclosure on Cynthia's suburban mansion. The eviction was completely ruthless and heavily documented. Sheriff's deputies stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, while a discount moving crew hastily packed her remaining belongings into cheap cardboard boxes. Without the family trust fund and with Bradley entirely broke and legally isolated, Cynthia had absolutely no safety net left to catch her. She was forcefully relocated to a damp, dilapidated apartment complex on the extreme outskirts of the city. The building smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and mildew, a massive, humiliating downgrade from the pristine, lavender-scented halls of her former country club life. Despite hitting absolute rock bottom, Cynthia's toxic narcissism remained entirely incurable. She strutted around the cracked concrete courtyard of the rundown complex, wearing her last remaining silk scarves and oversized designer sunglasses. She aggressively cornered her new hardworking blue-collar neighbors by the communal mailboxes. She loudly complained about the inadequate water pressure and the horrific lack of valet parking. She spun a pathetic transparent lie to anyone who was forced to listen. She claimed she was merely renting the dreadful little unit temporarily while her primary estate underwent a multi-million-dollar architectural renovation. The neighbors simply rolled their eyes and walked away completely exhausted by her delusional aristocratic performance. I decided to check on my former mother-in-law personally, not out of pity, but to tie up one final, highly satisfying loose end. I did not take the Maybach this time. I wanted something louder, something that screamed undeniable self-made wealth. I slid into the driver's seat of my brand-new custom-ordered Aston Martin. The sleek silver sports car roared to life, the twin-turbo engine echoing aggressively inside my pristine garage. I drove out to the suburban wasteland where Cynthia was currently hiding. The moment the gleaming, low-profile Aston Martin turned into the pothole-ridden parking lot of the apartment complex, it instantly commanded the attention of every single resident. People peeked out from behind their cheap plastic blinds. Children stopped playing on the cracked sidewalks. I parked the magnificent machine directly in front of Cynthia's ground-floor unit, ensuring the aggressive purr of the engine rattled her cheap single-pane windows before I cut the ignition. Cynthia was standing on her tiny rusted metal balcony, holding a chipped ceramic mug. I watched through the tinted windshield as her eyes widened in absolute shock. She recognized my face the exact second I stepped out of the luxury vehicle. But instead of retreating into her damp apartment in shame, her delusional mind immediately constructed a wildly inaccurate fantasy. Cynthia set her mug down and practically sprinted toward the parking lot. She adjusted her silk scarf, her face instantly morphing into a mask of smug, triumphant arrogance. In her deeply fractured reality, my arrival in a multi-million-dollar sports car meant only one thing. She honestly believed the guilt had finally consumed me. She thought the elite society had rejected my new money, and I had come crawling to her miserable apartment to beg for her maternal forgiveness. She fully expected me to hand over the deed to the historic commercial building to buy my way back into her good graces. I leaned casually against the polished silver hood of the Aston Martin wearing a sharp tailored white blazer and designer sunglasses. Cynthia marched right up to me, puffing out her chest, ready to accept my pathetic surrender. "I knew you would eventually come to your senses, Olivia," Cynthia declared, her voice dripping with extreme, unearned condescension. "The guilt must be absolutely eating you alive. You realized you cannot survive in high society without my guidance and my family name. I suppose I can find it in my heart to forgive your little public tantrum provided you brought the commercial property deed and the keys to my historic building. Hand them over and we can put this entire ugly misunderstanding behind us." I did not laugh. I did not even smile. I just stared at her, feeling a profound sense of clinical detachment. I reached into the interior pocket of my white blazer and pulled out a crisp, heavy, legally bound envelope. Cynthia's greedy eyes locked onto the thick paper. She eagerly reached her trembling hand out, ready to snatch her precious real estate back from the ruthless corporate machine she thought she had finally defeated. I placed the envelope firmly into her outstretched hand. "You might want to open that and read the itemized list before you start planning your grand return to the country club," I instructed, my voice as cold and hard as a glacier. Cynthia greedily ripped open the seal, her eyes scanning the top document. The smug, triumphant smile slid completely off her face, instantly replaced by a look of absolute soul-crushing horror. It was not a property deed. It was not a legal transfer of assets. It was a commercial invoice. "This is an itemized bill for professional heavy-duty hazard cleaning and industrial waste removal," I stated clearly, ensuring every neighbor hovering nearby could hear the absolute truth. "When my company officially seized your historic building, we found that you had left the grand ballroom in a state of absolute disgusting ruin. You abandoned broken crystal, ruined catering equipment, and months of unpaid utility notices scattered across my property. That invoice is for $32,000. And my legal team has already filed a civil claim to garnish whatever pathetic Social Security checks you have left until the debt is paid in full." Cynthia gasped, her hands shaking violently as the invoice fluttered to the wet pavement. "You cannot do this to me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a desperate wail. "I am your family! You are a monster!" I slowly removed my designer sunglasses, locking eyes with the broken, bankrupt woman who had tormented me for 7 years. "I am exactly what you created, Cynthia. This is the cleaning bill for the trash you left at my commercial building. You once said I had absolutely no place in this family. You were completely right. My place is at the very top, looking directly down at you." Cynthia let out a visceral, agonizing scream of total, absolute powerlessness, her wails echoing uselessly across the muddy parking lot as I turned my back, slid gracefully into the roaring Aston Martin, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. The commercial real estate industry is a small, tightly knit community built entirely on reputation, prestige, and absolute trust. When the spectacular high-definition footage of Bradley being arrested on the stage of his mother's foreclosed building circulated through the city's financial district, his career was instantly and permanently incinerated. He was blacklisted by every single brokerage firm, investment agency, and corporate office in the state. No legitimate entity would ever hire a disgraced, highly publicized fraudster who attempted to legally steal a $40 million medical software company. Stripped of his tailored suits, his luxury vehicles, and his phony aristocratic persona, Bradley was forcefully ejected into the harsh, unforgiving reality of the minimum wage labor market. He now stood under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of a discount big-box electronics retailer, wearing a scratchy, bright blue polyester polo shirt with a cheap plastic name tag pinned unevenly to his chest. He spent his miserable, exhausting shifts hauling heavy flat-screen televisions into the trunks of minivans for irritable, demanding customers who yelled at him over expired coupon codes and missing warranties. The man who once bragged about closing multi-million-dollar commercial deals was now aggressively reprimanded for failing to sell enough extended protection plans on cheap blenders. But the physical labor and the daily verbal abuse from impatient shoppers were not his ultimate punishment. The true soul-crushing devastation arrived every other Friday when his store manager handed him his meager printed pay stub. Bradley's bloodshot eyes watered as he stared at the heavily redacted numbers on the cheap paper. A massive, legally mandated wage garnishment instantly swallowed 70% of his microscopic paycheck before the funds even hit his severely overdrawn bank account. Lexi, absolutely terrified by the impending corporate lawsuits for massive credit fraud and the crushing weight of the luxury vehicle debt, had completely vanished in the middle of the night. She fled the state, entirely abandoning the repossessed Porsche and leaving Bradley as the sole legally bound target for the aggressive collection agencies. He was quite literally sweeping retail floors and selling discount charging cables to slowly pay off a luxury sports car he no longer possessed, saddled with catastrophic debt left behind by a mistress who completely despised him. Miles away from the electronics store, Cynthia was experiencing her own custom-designed hell on earth. Without the protective, enabling shield of the family trust fund, she was forced to seek actual employment for the first time in 4 decades, just to afford basic groceries and rent for her damp, moldy apartment. She stood behind the checkout counter of a high-end organic grocery store located squarely in the center of her former affluent suburban neighborhood. The universe possesses a brilliant, deeply poetic sense of irony. Cynthia wore a shapeless dark green apron over her cheap, heavily stained uniform pants. Her hands, once covered in expensive diamond rings and fresh manicures, were now dry, calloused, and cracked from constantly handling barcode scanners, bagging raw produce, and pushing heavily disinfected shopping carts across the asphalt parking lot. She stared blankly at the moving black conveyor belt, dreading the exact moment the automatic sliding glass doors would open. 2 impeccably dressed women walked into her checkout lane, their shopping carts loaded with imported truffles, expensive organic wines, and artisan cheeses. Cynthia's stomach plummeted straight to the floor. They were senior board members of the Oakwood Country Club. They were the exact same elite socialites who used to drink her stolen vintage champagne and eagerly listen to her venomous, fabricated lies about my character. The women did not look away out of pity or social grace. They stared directly at Cynthia with piercing, unadulterated amusement. They placed their expensive groceries on the belt, exchanging loud, highly calculated whispers about the tragic, pathetic downfall of the woman scanning their items. They specifically mentioned the spectacular police raid at the historic building and the hilarious rumors of Bradley working at a discount electronics outlet. Cynthia's hands shook violently as she bagged an expensive bottle of imported olive oil. Her teenage shift manager, a 19-year-old boy holding a clipboard, snapped at her loudly from across the registers, ordering her to bag the items faster to keep the premium checkout line moving. Cynthia had to bite her tongue, swallow every single ounce of her massive toxic pride, and force a painfully humiliating smile. She politely handed the lengthy receipt to the women who had just spent her entire monthly salary on a casual afternoon grocery run. She had to endure this excruciating, highly localized public execution every single day. The devastating consequences of their monumental greed stretched out endlessly before them, a lifetime sentence of poverty, grueling labor, and absolute social exile. I did not need to actively monitor their daily destruction. I simply felt the profound fundamental shift in the universe. The toxic parasitic infection had been surgically removed from my life, leaving behind a clean, incredibly vibrant space to build an entirely new reality. The harsh, aggressive thunderstorms of the previous weeks eventually gave way to a brilliant, unseasonably warm weekend afternoon. I stood in the massive sunlit chef's kitchen of my estate, slicing fresh organic fruit on a heavy marble cutting board. The expansive glass doors leading out to the pristine manicured gardens were wide open, letting the gentle breeze carry the sweet scent of blooming jasmine directly into the house. There was no screaming. There were no aggressive, entitled demands for money. There were no fragile, deeply insecure egos demanding constant validation and emotional labor. There was only absolute, unfiltered, undeniable peace. The smooth, melodic chime of the front gate intercom echoed softly through the quiet house. I tapped the high-definition security monitor built seamlessly into the kitchen island. A sleek, understated luxury sedan was parked on the circular driveway. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing Terrence's sharp, highly intelligent face. He smiled warmly at the security camera, giving a quick, familiar wave. Sitting in the passenger seat beside him, looking incredibly radiant, entirely stress-free, and resting her hands on a beautifully growing baby bump, was Monica. I pressed the silver button to open the heavy iron gates, feeling a genuine bright smile spread across my face. The toxic biological family ties had been completely and permanently severed, but the true loyal allies who had survived the inferno alongside me were finally arriving to celebrate the dawn of a beautiful new era. Exactly 1 year has passed since that chaotic, highly publicized Thanksgiving evening. I am standing on the sprawling private wrap-around balcony of my brand-new corporate headquarters. The crisp, electric air of Manhattan whips gently against my tailored designer coat. I look out over the glittering, infinite skyline of New York City. The aggressive, pulsing energy of the financial district hums hundreds of feet below me, a constant, beautiful reminder of the absolute magnitude of the world I now comfortably occupy. The transition from a suffocating suburban marriage to the absolute pinnacle of global commerce was incredibly swift, but it was entirely earned. The monumental $40 million acquisition by Vanguard Health Systems was never meant to be my final destination. It was simply the initial seed capital for a much grander, far more impactful vision. I took a massive strategic portion of that liquid buyout money and established an elite angel investment fund. My new corporate mission is highly specific and entirely unapologetic. I aggressively scout, mentor, and heavily fund brilliant female entrepreneurs who are actively building revolutionary technology startups in stealth mode. I sit at the head of a massive mahogany boardroom table, listening to brilliant women pitch their software companies, and I write them seven-figure checks to turn their relentless hard work into undeniable reality. I deliberately bypass the arrogant traditional male investors who automatically assume a woman in a modest sweater is merely a data entry clerk. I am actively building an entire army of financially independent, untouchable female executives who will never have to rely on a fraudulent man for a single dime. I am not the only one thriving in this beautiful, completely detoxified new reality. The heavy soundproof glass door of my office terrace slides open. I turn around and smile genuinely. Terrence and Monica step out into the bright afternoon sunlight. They flew into the city this morning for a weekend visit, and the transformation in both of them is absolutely staggering. Terrence is no longer just a brilliant employee working under someone else's corporate umbrella. Using a substantial, highly confidential seed investment I provided combined with my aggressive corporate mentorship, he successfully launched his own elite forensic accounting firm right in the heart of the city. He now owns a highly lucrative practice that specializes in auditing massive commercial real estate firms, actively hunting down and legally destroying arrogant brokers who attempt to commit the exact same financial frauds my ex-husband normalized. Terrence built an empire of absolute accountability, and his professional reputation is completely sterling. But the most beautiful transformation belongs entirely to Monica. She stands beside her husband, her hands resting gently on a highly visible, beautifully round baby bump. She is entering the third trimester of her first pregnancy, and she is absolutely glowing with a profound, unshakable sense of peace. There is no anxiety tightening the corners of her eyes. There is no lingering fear of a sudden hysterical phone call demanding emergency cash to cover a bounced country club check. On the exact day her mother was evicted from the historic building, Monica permanently changed her phone number, deleted all her old social media accounts, and completely severed every single remaining tie to her toxic bloodline. She legally and emotionally emancipated herself from the crushing weight of her mother and brother. She is bringing her new child into a world built on authentic love, financial transparency, and absolute emotional safety. She broke the generational curse, and she did it by simply walking away from the burning wreckage and never once looking back. We spend the entire afternoon discussing Terrence's upcoming corporate audits and Monica's pristine, carefully designed nursery. There is no toxic gossip. There are no frantic discussions about maxed-out credit cards or fake high society events. We are simply three successful, heavily grounded adults enjoying the magnificent life we actively chose to secure for ourselves. When the sun finally begins to dip below the towering steel skyscrapers, casting brilliant shades of gold and vibrant orange across the Hudson River, Terrence and Monica excuse themselves to head back to their luxury hotel to rest. I remain alone on the expansive balcony. The city lights begin to flicker on, illuminating the aggressive, beautiful architecture of New York. I walk over to the small outdoor bar and pour myself a single generous measure of vintage champagne into a heavy crystal flute. The sparkling liquid catches the ambient city light. This is not champagne purchased with stolen equity or predatory loans. This is the taste of absolute, unadulterated victory. I step up to the thick glass railing, looking down at the millions of people moving through the bustling streets below. I take a slow, deliberate sip of the cold wine. The silence surrounding my personal space is not lonely. It is the most powerful, deafening sound in the entire world. I look out at the horizon, my mind perfectly clear, my heart completely devoid of any lingering resentment. They called me a freeloader. They tried to drag me down into the mud. But they did not know that I did not need to destroy their lives. I simply stopped paying to maintain their cheap illusions and let them burn themselves to the ground. The sweetest revenge is making them watch me live a brilliant life they will absolutely never have. I raise my crystal glass one final time, offering a silent, mocking toast to the ghosts of my past. I take the final sip, turn my back on the setting sun, and walk confidently back inside my empire. The heavy glass doors slide shut, sealing the brilliant, untouchable world perfectly inside. The screen cuts to black. The most profound lesson we can extract from this journey is the undeniable power of silent resilience and financial independence. Society often conditions us to believe that when we are attacked, belittled, or betrayed by those who are supposed to be our family, we must scream to defend our worth. We are taught to fight loudly to prove we belong. However, true power lies in absolute detachment. When you are surrounded by toxic individuals who build their identities on shallow illusions and predatory behavior, engaging in their chaotic drama only feeds their narcissistic supply. The ultimate victory is not found in screaming matches or public tearful confrontations. It is found in quietly and ruthlessly building your own empire while they are busy underestimating you. Financial independence is not just about having the ability to afford a luxurious lifestyle. It is the ultimate impenetrable armor against manipulation. When you control your own resources, you control your own destiny. You permanently strip abusers of their most effective weapon, which is your dependency on them. Furthermore, this story teaches us that you do not need to actively destroy toxic people to get your revenge. You simply need to stop subsidizing their delusions. When you permanently remove your financial and emotional support, manipulative people will inevitably collapse under the crushing weight of their own incompetence and greed. Their hubris becomes their own executioner. Healing does not always require forgiveness or reconciliation with those who sought to break you. Sometimes healing means recognizing your absolute worth, enforcing ironclad boundaries, and walking away to build a brilliant reality that they will never have the privilege to touch. True justice is simply letting the trash take itself out while you rise to the top. If this story of reclaiming your power and building an untouchable life resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences in the comments below.